It's September 1947 at the Mojave Desert dive bar known as Pancho's Fly-In. For pilots at the nearby Muroc airfield, the Fly-In isn't just the best saloon for miles around, it's the only one. The regulars whoop their hellos as Chuck Yeager saunters in with his friend and engineer, Jack Ridley, fresh from another successful test run of Muroc's fastest plane, the X-1. For Yeager, and anyone else working on top-secret, often life-risking test flights, this is the place to blow off some steam and build their nerve back up. And they couldn't do it without the Fly's legendary owner and bartender, Ms. Pancho Barnes. She pours a couple of glasses of scotch for Yeager and Ridley as they belly up to the bar. Yeager, once you cross that sound barrier, you better find a way to take me for a spin at Mach 1. I want to feel the rumble of those rockets. It must be like riding a comet. Pancho, I'd feel a hell of a lot better up there if you were with me. Ridley laughs. I wouldn't. I've got my hands full with Yeager on that plane. I don't need another outlaw up there with him. Pancho got her nickname from her days running guns for Mexican revolutionaries. She became such a skilled pilot that she went on to fly stunts in Hollywood movies before moving out here to the sticks to set up shop. Besides the bar, she also owns a motel and a dude ranch with a rodeo arena and horse stables. Her clientele is mostly test pilots, and she loves them all like brothers. But she has a special fondness for Yeager. She laughs as she tops off his scotch. Now, is it true when you break the sound barrier, it's going to make such a loud boom that it'll crack my windows? How does that work anyway? Ridley chimes in. That's the sonic boom. We don't know for sure because nobody's done it. But we think that the shock waves bouncing off a plane going faster than sound will feel like an explosion. But only to those in what we call the sonic cone, directly under the plane. Next to them at the bar, an older and more experienced pilot slams down his drink. He's heard the rumors about the X-1. What makes you young fellas think you can fly faster than sound? Stupid enough to get yourself killed. Pancho is on him in a second. She points the bottle of scotch she's holding right in his face. Hey, these two could fly right up your ass and you'd be farting shockwaves before you knew what hit you. Everyone, even the old pilot, has to laugh at that. Ridley raises his glass. To the patron saint of flying and hell-raising, Ms. Pancho Barnes. And in that moment, Ridley and Yeager are as bold as Pancho believes they can be. The feeling won't last beyond tonight, but it'll get them through it. Adyen is the payments platform built to help your business grow. With Adyen, you can accept payments in-app, online, in-store, touch-free, and beyond. And Adyen technology adapts to any business, store, industry, or shopper journey. From retail and marketplaces to subscriptions and mobile payments, you can do any of it or all of it. You'll get flexible features that fit your business with a single integration. You'll even get revenue optimization and customer insights in an all-in-one solution. So keep your customers happy and your business growing with Adyen. Business, not boundaries. Visit adyen.com to learn more. That's ADYEN.com. We get support from CarMax. Now, when it comes to buying a car, most of us shop around to make sure we're getting the best deal. So the same should be true when it comes to selling your car. You wouldn't settle from the first offer you get from the dealership, right? Well, thanks to our friends at CarMax, you don't have to. Because in just 2 minutes at CarMax.com, you can get a real offer on your car that's good for 7 days. You can accept the offer on the spot, shop it around, or take a week to think it over. And CarMax will buy your car even if you don't buy theirs. So whether you're thinking about selling or trading in, take 2 minutes and head to CarMax.com to get a real offer real fast. CarMax, the way it should be. From Wondery, I'm Stephen Johnson, and this is American Innovations. In 1947, in the Mojave Desert in California, a secret program was underway. Chuck Yeager was test flying the Bell X-1 experimental airplane for the Army Air Corps. His goal? To be the first man to go supersonic, to fly faster than the speed of sound. Nobody knew if the task before Yeager was even possible. Every plane that had approached the speed of sound had experienced a breakdown in flight control, if not a total breakdown in the plane itself, as it physically crumbled under the extreme pressures of high-velocity flight. The hope for Yeager, and everyone at the Air Corps aware of his mission, was that the unique aerodynamics of the X-1 would finally allow a pilot to break through the so-called sound barrier. The first country to achieve this breakthrough would have aerial dominance in any future military conflict. And with the Soviet Union growing its own technological capability and sphere of influence, future conflicts seemed almost inevitable. The commander of the Air Corps' test pilot program, Colonel Albert Boyd, chose Chuck Yeager for his skill, instincts, and ability to act under stress. But Yeager also had a reckless streak that had already endangered his mission once, and might endanger it again. Now, like the X-1 itself, Yeager was about to find out just how much pressure he could take. This is the second and final episode of our series on breaking the sound barrier. Sonic boom or bust. It's September 1947, in a hot, smoky conference room in the barracks of the Muroc Army Airfield Base. Jack Ridley and Chuck Yeager sit across from two engineers from NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. They're discussing Yeager's upcoming flight plans, and they're going in circles. Everyone's sweating from the heat. Things have gotten tense. One of the engineers stands up to circle some equations he's written on the chalkboard. The wind tunnel tests indicate that the drag at 0.9 Mach and higher would reach infinity. The pressure on the wings would be too strong. Ridley stubs out his cigarette in frustration. You keep saying that, but wind tunnels are known to give inaccurate readings at speeds higher than 0.85. So that data you keep quoting at us is useless. My numbers are different. The engineer looks unconvinced. Our advice is that you take it slow. Your next flight shouldn't go higher than 0.86. Yeager speaks up, frustrated. 0.86? I mean, with all due respect, at that rate, it will take me 6 months to reach Mach 1. Well, what would you suggest, Yeager? Look, I'm only flying twice a week, as it is, to give you guys time to run all the numbers and analyze the flight data. And you said yourselves, according to the sensors on the X-1's body, the shock waves are moving over it exactly like the designers intended. I say we're ready to go to 0.94. But what's the rush? You could get yourself killed jumping up to that speed. We need more data. The NACA engineers don't understand Yeager's impatience, but Ridley does. He and Yeager exchange a look that tells Ridley everything he needs to know. If Yeager doesn't do this soon, he might lose his nerve. They've both seen it happen to other pilots. You overthink it, tense up, and suddenly you're done. For Yeager, it's now or never. Ridley speaks on his friend's behalf. If Captain Yeager thinks we're ready to go to 0.94, then we're ready. Nobody knows that plane better than him. The engineers look at each other exasperated and start to pack up their briefcases. Fine, you have our recommendation. Ultimately, it's up to you guys, but ignore it at your own risk. It's October 5th, 1947, and Yeager is up in the X-1 on his 7th powered test flight. The higher he goes, the deeper blue the sky becomes. On his last flight, he experienced some buffeting when he reached 0.86 Mach. It was like driving on a very bumpy dirt road with no shocks. Not much different from the roads he learned to drive on in rural West Virginia. Nothing he couldn't handle. Now, everything is going smoothly. Gotta fire off the next rocket chamber. Altitude 40,000 feet, 0.94 Mach. The plane begins to shake. Yeager has developed an iron stomach over the years, but the violent drops and jolts are testing him. His helmet clangs against the wall of the cockpit. He checks his instruments and grips the control wheel tight. Experiencing some of the usual buffeting. He pulls on the control wheel to adjust his altitude and nothing happens. What the hell? The plane is tilted upwards and he can't bring the nose down. If he can't correct it soon, the plane will run out of forward momentum and begin to flip backwards, nose over tail. Ridley, I've lost pitch control. The elevators aren't responding. Elevators are hinged flaps on the wings of a plane's tail. You raise the elevators to tilt the nose of the plane up and lower them to tilt the nose down. Yeager can't get them to move at all, but he doesn't panic. I'm going to have to shut off the engine, dump fuel, and glide down.
Got it. When you lose some speed, the control wheel should return to functioning.
With the engines cut, the plane continues to soar upward on pure momentum. Yeager rides it out, waiting until the X-1 loses enough speed that he can regain control. He dumps his fuel and begins his descent, steering back towards his landing strip, the dry lake bed just outside the airfield. Down on the lake bed, Yeager climbs out of the cockpit. Ridley pulls up in his car to give him a ride back to the hangar. The two ride in silence for a moment, before Yeager says what they're both thinking. I think that was my last ride. I can't go faster than 0.94. Not if the elevator stops working like that. Ridley doesn't answer. Yeager knows he's feeling just as crushed as he is. Maybe the NACA engineers had been right. Maybe it really is impossible to fly faster than sound. As soon as Colonel Boyd hears about Yeager's latest test flight, he flies into Muroc from his headquarters back at Wright Field in Ohio. Everybody gathers again in the smoky conference room to decide the project's future. The mood is grim. Yeager hasn't quite shaken the sick feeling from his emergency landing, though he's careful not to show it. An engineer from NACA presents his calculations. So according to our post-flight analysis, it looks like a shockwave off the plane hit the tail right at the hinge point of the right side elevator. And the air from this pressure wave locked the elevator in its up position. So the motors that control the elevator weren't strong enough to resist the force. Yeager nods. That explains why my controls stopped working. I've never experienced anything like that before. Boyd scowls and shakes his head. Well, it looks to me like we've reached the end of the line. Glad you were able to get yourself out of a hairy situation back there, Yeager. No one else speaks. It seems like that's it. The mission is over. Yeager sits in stunned silence as the engineers begin to gather their papers. Wait. At one end of the conference table, Ridley stands up. In his hand is a piece of paper covered in hand-scribbled equations and notes. Maybe Yeager can fly without using the elevator. Maybe he can get by using only the horizontal stabilizer. The horizontal stabilizer is the pair of wings at the end of the plane's tail. On a normal plane, the stabilizer is fixed in place. But because flight engineers are constantly fine-tuning the X-1's performance, its stabilizer can be adjusted. Ridley continues. Listen, the X-1 already allows you to move the stabilizer directly. Maybe if we can build out better control from the cockpit, we'd be able to adjust its position in flight. It won't be as precise as the elevators, but it might be enough. The NACA engineers glance around at each other, confused. No one's ever proposed using the horizontal stabilizer in this way before. But Yeager gets the concept immediately. The elevators are weak when they have no leverage, but the stabilizer could stand up to the force of the air pressure. An engineer is more skeptical. But the stabilizer is massive and heavy. Yes, there's a built-in motor that can adjust its position, but that motor was only designed for ground use. No one's ever used it in flight. It might not be powerful enough to make the stabilizer pivot under serious pressure. Ridley nods. That's a possibility. But it wouldn't be much worse than what just happened. The room sits for a moment in silence. Then Yeager looks over at Boyd. So shall we try it? In the tunnel first? He means the wind tunnel. Boyd hesitates, but nods. There's no reason not to. Nobody can get hurt testing it on the ground. It's agreed. Everyone gathers their things to go. But before Yeager can leave, Boyd grabs him by the shoulder. He waits for the other men to leave the conference room before speaking. Listen, Yeager, I don't want you to be railroaded into this by Ridley or anyone else. If you don't feel comfortable with the risks, just say so. Colonel Boyd, respectfully, sir. Ridley takes better care of me than I do myself. If he thinks it's worth a try, then it is. That evening, at Yeager's modest home on the base, his wife Glennis sets dinner on the table, a pot roast that she had to drive 30 miles into town to buy. Mickey, the baby, sits in his high chair, trying to feed himself peas. The toddler, Donald, crawls around under the table, making shooting sounds. Jaeger is preoccupied, shoveling food into his mouth in silence. Glennis stares at him from across the table until he finally looks up. "What?" Glennis sets down her fork. She wouldn't have married Jaeger if she didn't love his fearlessness. She believes he has a calling. She doesn't complain about him working so much, missing the birth of both his babies, making them live out here in the middle of nowhere. But tonight, she can't ignore the voice in her head. "Chuck, maybe going that fast is unnatural. Maybe the sound barrier is there for a reason and shouldn't be broken." Jaeger stares at his plate. For a moment, she thinks she sees a different side of him. But when he looks up, he's got the same sparkle in his eye. The X-1 is the best airplane that's ever been flown. And guess who gets to fly it? I do. It's not a real answer, but Glennis knows it's the closest to one she'll ever get. And something about the look in her husband's eye reassures her. She smiles across the table, and together, she and Jaeger go back to their dinner, enjoying the antics of their children. After testing the stabilizer system in the wind tunnel, a few days later, Jaeger takes off to test it for the first time in flight. It's his 8th time up in the X-1, or the bright orange beast, as he likes to call it. Jaeger repeats exactly what he did on the previous flight. In order to test Ridley's theory, he needs to force his elevators to stop working again. 0.85 Mach. Right on cue, the buffeting begins. The X-1 jolts, taking shockwaves to its underside. This time, instead of using the elevators to stabilize the plane, Jaeger turns on the motor that powers the horizontal stabilizer. He adjusts the switch and feels the nose drop down ever so slightly. And then, the shaking stops. He did it. He used the tail of the plane, not the elevators, to control his pitch. So far, so good. Gonna try it again at 0.94 Mach. He fires off another rocket chamber. The G-forces slam him back into his seat. He takes a deep breath and uses the stabilizer switch again to tilt himself down. Slowly, he adjusts the stabilizer until he's evened out. A moment of relief. Ridley was right. Woo! He lets out a whoop. With it goes the dread that had him tensing every muscle in his body. That last flight had him spooked. But now, with Ridley's solution, he's feeling back in control again. All good at 43,000 feet. On my way down. But then Jaeger notices a new problem. His windshield is beginning to fog up. He leans forward to wipe the window with his hand, but the fog has already turned to frost. In swirls, it obscures more and more of the windshield. He pulls off his glove and tries to scratch the frost off with his nails, but it's too cold. If he keeps that up, his hands will be too numb to work the controls. But how is he going to land the plane if he can't see? Man, it's always something. Jaeger radios to the chase pilot, who's flying behind him. "Hey, looks like I'm in a bit of a pickle. The windshield is frosted over and now I can't see."
Okay, partner, I'll talk you in. You must have done a lot of sweating in that cockpit to ice the damn windshield.
Not as much as I'm gonna do with you talking me in. Jaeger has to rely on his instruments and the other pilot's instructions. He uses the compass and monitors his speed and rate of descent to aim for his landing target. Pancake flat lake bed that gives him an 8-mile runway. But he has to come in at the right angle.
All right, turn left 10 degrees.
Which he's able to do, thanks to the backup pilot. On the ground, Jaeger can't get out of the freezing cockpit quickly enough. Steam comes off of him in the hot desert sun as he climbs out. But he's back on Earth, both him and the plane, in one piece. And more importantly, he's got his mojo back. Now that he knows how to control the X-1's pitch at 0.94 Mach, maybe he can finally reach that elusive speed of Mach 1. Are you hiring for spring? Maybe you need to hire someone to wear a lot of hats, which can be challenging. Or you might have a simple position to fill, but it's taking forever to find someone who's a great fit for your company. That's where ZipRecruiter comes in. ZipRecruiter can help you find qualified candidates fast. And now you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/AI. Whether you need to hire a civil engineer in New York, a pediatric nurse in Nebraska, an attorney in Colorado, or even a mascot in Missouri, ZipRecruiter's matching technology finds people with the right experience for your job and actively invites them to apply. It's so effective that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. From accountant to zoologist and everything in between, ZipRecruiter makes hiring easier. And right now you can try it for free at our Only Our Listeners Get It link, ZipRecruiter.com/AI. Head to ZipRecruiter.com/AI today to try ZipRecruiter for free and support our show. One more time, that's ZipRecruiter.com/AI. Where's my order? Where's my order? Where's my order? Break free from customer support monotony. Welcome to Intercom for Customer Support, the business messenger that uses chatbots, shared inboxes, apps, and more. Intercom's business messenger resolves questions that can be answered automatically, so customer support feels less like Groundhog Day and more like help is on the way. Go to intercom.com/support to learn more about Intercom's business messenger for customer support. It's the Sunday before Yeager's 9th powered flight. Yeager and his wife Glennis have found a babysitter for the evening, so they're out for a rare date night, having dinner and drinks at Poncho's Fly Inn. They're surrounded by hard-drinking pilots and aircraft engineers, men who can't stop talking shop. But Glennis likes it here as much as Yeager does. It reminds her of the kinds of dives they got into trouble at when they first met. Poncho comes over and slaps Yeager on the back. Heard about the windshield. This whiskey should warm you up. On the house. She puts down 2 shot glasses in front of the couple. Glennis opens her mouth to ask what exactly happened with the windshield, but stops herself. If Yeager hasn't told her, he's not going to tell her. Poncho, who seems to hear about everything, catches her confused look and changes the subject. Glennis, why don't you take this guy out to the stables later? You can take a pair of my horses out for a night ride. Glennis looks up at her and smiles. That sounds nice, Poncho. What do you think, Chuck? Up for a ride? Yeager grins. When am I not? That's how Yeager and Glennis find themselves saddled up and trotting through the cool night air of the high desert. It's a moonless night, and they ride under a canopy of stars. Glennis feels no different tonight than she did on her first date with Chuck. Giddy and in love. Chuck must be feeling it too. He pulls his horse up close and bends over to give Glennis a kiss on the cheek. Jackrabbits scatter at the sound of their horses' hooves. The spiky silhouettes of Joshua trees emerge out of the darkness along the trail. What a strange landscape they found themselves in. Glennis never would have predicted that her life would look like this. She reaches out and takes Yeager's hand as their horses trot through the dark desert. When the lights of the Fly Inn are just dots on the horizon, she turns to her husband. We should probably head back. I told the babysitter's parents I'd have her home by 10. Yeager pulls his hand away and clutches the reins. Last one of the corral's a rotten egg. As Yeager gallops away into the night, Glennis can't help but smile. Never a dull moment. Yeah! Glennis urges her horse into a gallop, standing in the stirrups and leaning forward into the horse's neck. Its mane whips across her face, smelling like her childhood on the farm. She's a skilled rider and quickly closes the distance between herself and Yeager. You might have to be the rotten egg for once. Yeager hears her gaining on him and pushes his horse forward. Glennis knows how much her husband hates losing. She's going to enjoy this. Then, in the dark, Glennis sees Yeager's horse pitch forward and the silhouette of his body fly through the air. She hears him land with an ugly thud. As she slows her own horse, she sees the cause of the accident. The gate they'd come out of earlier is now closed. Yeager had run his horse right into it, sending the poor animal tumbling over the gate and him with it. In the dark, he must not have seen it until it was too late. The horse, frightened but apparently uninjured, clambers to its feet and bolts towards the stable. But Yeager lies on the ground, motionless. Glennis jumps off her horse and runs to him. Chuck! Chuck! Wake up! She kneels over him, touches his face. He groans and opens his eyes. His hand goes protectively to his right side. He winces in pain as Glennis helps him up. I'll take you to the hospital on the base. No. Glennis already knows what he's thinking. If they say you shouldn't be flying, then you shouldn't be flying, Chuck. In the starlight, she can see how much pain her husband is in. He grimaces as she helps him to his feet, but already he's trying not to show it. "Come on, hon. Let's go home. I'll sleep it off." But Yeager hardly sleeps that night. The pain in his side keeps him up. It hurts just to breathe. As he lies there staring at the ceiling, a series of memories parade through his mind. His near misses, one after the other with that X1. The control column that didn't work, the frosted windshield with his claw marks all over it. Was this accident his body's way of giving him an out? How is it possible that he, a pilot with perfect vision, didn't see that the gate was closed? He isn't going to admit it to Glennis or anyone else. He wasn't raised to talk about his feelings, but he's scared. More scared than he's ever felt in all his years of flying. When he gets out of bed the next morning, he nearly faints from the pain. He knows he doesn't have a choice. He needs to go to a doctor. Glennis takes him to a doctor off the base so that Yeager can keep his injury a secret. The doctor confirms what he had feared. He has broken 2 ribs and will need to immobilize that side of his upper body for a few weeks. Yeager's next test flight is in less than 24 hours. It's dawn on October 14th, 1947, the day of Yeager's 9th powered flight in the X-1, 2 days since he broke his ribs. Glennis gives him a ride to the base. A silence hangs between them. With every bump in the road, she sees her husband wince. Under his shirt, he's wrapped in ace bandages and medical tape, but she can tell that even the slightest movement of his torso is agony. She thinks he should postpone his flight, but arguing with him about these things is like arguing with a wall. They haven't said more than a few words to each other since breakfast. "I'll pick you up when you land, unless you've changed your mind about going. Listen, nobody's going to let me take off if they think I'll be in trouble." Glennis forces herself to smile, but her smile disappears when Yeager gets out of the car. She knows that under all that bluster, he's worried. And she knows that unless someone physically drags him away from the X-1, broken ribs or no, he's going to fly it. Yeager makes the long walk across the tarmac, his side aching with each step. He arrives at the hangar to see his ground crew pouring alcohol and liquid oxygen into the X-1's fuel tanks. In the cockpit, one of them smears the inside of the windshield with their improvised solution to the frost problem, a thin layer of shampoo, a surprisingly effective antifreeze agent. He's looking for Ridley, the only person he trusts enough to share the extent of his injury. If Ridley says no, Yeager knows that's it. "You guys seen Jack around?" The ground crew laughs when they see him. The backup pilot tosses him a paper bag. Yeager catches it with his left hand. "What's this?" He opens it. Inside is a carrot, a pair of glasses, and a rope. "We figured you might want a bucking bronco survival kit. The glasses are to help you see where you're going next time." Everyone's heard he got thrown off a horse, but nobody seems to know he got hurt. Yeager takes a bite of the carrot to show that he's a good sport. The backup pilot laughs and points past Yeager's shoulder. "Ridley's out there, on the tarmac." Of course. He's outside smoking and pacing, probably going over every last detail of today's flight in his head. "Hey, Jack, you got a minute?" Yeager tells him the truth, all of it. Ridley listens without reacting, except maybe to take even deeper drags than usual on his cigarette. As Yeager gets to the end of his story, he looks back at the X-1. "You know, if it was my first flight, then I wouldn't even think about doing it with these busted ribs, but it'll be my 9th. I know every move I've got to make, and most of the switches are right there on the control column, so I'm hardly moving much anyway." Ridley squints at his friend. "Yeah, the switches will be fine. What I'm hung up on is the cockpit door. How are you going to lock it behind yourself?" On their flights, Ridley closes the cockpit door after Yeager climbs into it, but Yeager has to lock it in place from the inside. And he has to do it with his right hand, the side of his body he can barely move. Damn, Ridley, I hadn't thought of that. But the wheels in Ridley's engineering brain are already turning. Okay, hold on. He stamps out his cigarette. "I have an idea. Follow me." In the hangar, Ridley asks the janitor if he can borrow his broom. He takes a saw from the mechanic's kit and hacks off a 10-inch length of broom handle, then hands it to Yeager. "Try this." The ground crew is on a break, so Jaeger climbs into the X-1's cockpit while no one else is looking. He puts both hands on the control wheel and closes his eyes for a second, feeling what it's like to sit there with his torso taped. The cockpit is so cramped, he hardly has any range of motion regardless of the injuries. It should be fine, he thinks. Well, except for locking the door. Jaeger takes the broom handle from his lap and nods to Ridley. Okay, let's try this. Ridley lowers the cockpit door. Using his stick, Jaeger is able to move the door handle into position without raising his arm. Then, with his left hand, after a few fumbles, he's able to bring the latch down and lock it. Got it. He tries it again several times until he feels like he has the hang of it. Then he climbs out, careful not to move his right side. Ridley watches him skeptically. How are you going to climb down the ladder from the B-29 midair with just one hand? One rung at a time, I guess. Before the flight, everyone gathers together in the hangar. Some of the pilots bow their heads in prayer. Not Jaeger, though. He doesn't pray before his flights, because, as he sees it, God can't help him. He has to help himself. It's not that he doesn't believe in God, but when he gets up there in the sky, as far as he's concerned, it's just him and the plane. And if he gets himself into a position where it's impossible to get out, well, then he'll live with the consequences. Or die with them. Birthdays, holidays, promotions, getting that last sprinkle donut. There's a lot in this world worth celebrating, but nothing is worth celebrating more than knowledge, especially knowledge that will pay off. Like understanding how compound interest works, knowing how to check your investment professional's background, or figuring out your risk tolerance, or finally understanding all those terms your friends keep throwing around, like ETF, ESG, and ICO. Go to investor.gov today to learn about these investment products and more. How much do you already know about investing? Find out by putting your financial knowledge to the test with their new investment quiz. Investor.gov is your unbiased resource for valuable investment information, tools, and tips. Before you invest, investor.gov. It's a little after 8 a.m. on October 14, 1947. 7,000 feet above the Mojave Desert, in the belly of a B-29 bomber, Chuck Yeager lowers himself down a metal ladder into the cockpit of the X-1. As with every X-1 test flight, this will be a drop launch. The B-29 will carry the smaller plane up to cruising altitude, then release it like a bomb, with Yeager in the pilot's seat. He climbs down slowly, wincing with each step. The tape on his chest is helping with the pain from his 2 broken ribs, as long as he doesn't have to move his right arm too much. Ridley is right behind him. Yeager looks up at his friend. All right, moment of truth. Yeager slides feet first into the cockpit. He pulls the broom handle out from under the seat and waits as Ridley lowers the door into place. Then, just like he practiced, Yeager uses the wooden stick to get the door handle into position and locks it with his left hand. He did it. Now comes the easy part. He puts on his flight helmet, struggling for a moment to do it with just his left hand. Then he slips on his oxygen mask and plugs into the radio. I'm in.
Roger that. Taking her up to 20,000 feet.
Yeager checks all the gauges, then tucks the broomstick between the seat and the door and waits, trying not to shiver in the cold of the cockpit, because even shivering hurts his ribs.
In position. Yeager, you ready?
Hell yes. Let's get this over with. The chains creak, and the X-1 is released into the sky at 20,000 feet. Immediately, something isn't right. The speed of the mothership must have been too slow, because now the X-1 is stalling. Yeager twists the control wheel. Finally, and painfully, he wrestles the plane into position, so its sharp nose is pointing down. Showtime! Yeager sets off the first 2 rocket chambers, and the plane surges up into the sky. At 0.87 Mach, the X-1 starts to shake. Yeager adjusts the horizontal stabilizer like he's practiced, and the shaking subsides. Had a mild buffet there, just the usual instability. At 0.92 Mach, he levels off at 42,000 feet. He's already used 70% of his fuel. If he wants to go to Mach 1, it's now or never. He fires off the 3rd rocket chamber and is almost immediately at 0.96 Mach. The sky around him is deep purple now. He can see the moon and the sun at the same time. This is the upper atmosphere, where the air is thin and crystal clear, no reflecting dust particles. As the Mach-meter needle continues to climb past 0.96, it suddenly gives a lurch, starts trembling around the dial, fluctuating up and down, then just goes right off the scale. Say, Ridley, make a note, will ya? There's something wrong with this old Mach-meter. It's gone kind of screwy on me. Did his Mach-meter just happen to break? Or did it stop working for a reason? Then, in that same instant, he realizes that his ride has become smooth. Surprisingly smooth. Like he's coasting. He looks at the Mach-meter again. It's back on the scale, but at the very edge of what it can read. Mach 1.06. But that would mean... Hey, Ridley, make another note here. Elevator effectiveness regained. We're cruising now. No buffeting at all. Then he hears another voice on the radio.
This is NACA from the tracking van. We just heard what sounded like a rumble of thunder. Does that mean what we think it means?
His sonic boom. So is that it? Did he just break the sound barrier? Just like that? With no turbulence, no buffeting, definitely no invisible wall up in the sky to stop him. The plane was flying smoother at this top speed than it ever had before. Yeager wants to confirm his speed with Ridley and the NACA team, but he's under strict orders. No radio discussions of speed over 0.96 Mach. This is still a top secret mission, and he's at a loss for words now anyway. I guess that's it. Bringing her home. His fuel spent, Yeager turns back towards the base to land. Feeling elated, yes, but also kind of numb. There was such a build-up to this moment. But then, when he finally did it, there was nothing to it at all. If he hadn't been monitoring his instruments, he wouldn't have known that anything momentous had happened. It's strange, he knows, to feel let down. He just made history. And yet, he thought he would be able to feel it when it happened. Back at the base, Yeager changes out of his flight suit and tries to make a quiet exit. Outside, Glennis is waiting for him in the car to drive him home. Yeager climbs gingerly into the passenger seat. Let's go home. I'm beat. But before Glennis can pull out, the other test pilots come pouring out of the barracks, cheering and whooping. They surround the car, banging on the hood and waving at Yeager. Ridley leads them, looking like he's about to explode from happiness. You're not seriously going home, are you? We're going to go to Poncho's to celebrate. Yeager flinches as his backup pilot reaches through the passenger side window to clap him on the back. Okay. He gets out of the car and goes around to the driver's side to give Glennis a kiss. She looks at him inquisitively and whispers, "Did you do it?" Yeager gives her a smile and a small nod, then turns back and joins the rowdy gang of pilots. Instruments on the X-1 measured Yeager's top speed that day as 1.07 Mach. That officially makes him the first human ever to travel faster than the speed of sound. It's a huge achievement, not just for Yeager, but for the newest branch of the United States military. Just a few weeks before Yeager's record-breaking flight, President Truman authorized the formation of the U.S. Air Force out of what had formerly been known as the Army Air Corps. It's an acknowledgement from the highest levels of government that more than ever, air superiority is a key component of America's military strategy. And now that America is the first country with a supersonic fighter jet, that superiority seems assured. At first, news of Yeager's flight is kept secret. In December 1947, 2 months after the flight, an aviation magazine breaks the story, but the Air Force denies it. It isn't until June 1948 that the Air Force confirms that the sound barrier has been broken and announces that Yeager was the one who did it. For a while, engineers studying Yeager's flight puzzle over why his ride became so smooth past Mach 1. They eventually realize that once a plane is traveling faster than the sound waves generated by its own engines, those waves no longer interact with the air around the plane to produce turbulence. That turbulence is at its worst as a plane approaches Mach 1. But past Mach 1, as Yeager puts it, it was as smooth as a baby's bottom. Grandma could be sitting up there sipping lemonade. In the summer of 1950, Yeager and Ridley fly along in a B-29 that carries the X-1 to its final resting place, the National Air Museum at the Smithsonian. Before they fly back, Yeager runs his hand one last time along the plane's needle nose, past the name he painted there 3 years earlier, Glamorous Glennis. Goodbye, you beautiful orange beast. Yeager goes on to have a long career training other test pilots. In 1953, he flies as a wingman when Jackie Cochran becomes the first woman to break the sound barrier. And in 1962, Yeager is named commander of the Aerospace Research Pilot School, where he's in charge of training a new class of pilots tasked with flying into space. They're called astronauts. In April 1962, Yeager stands on the tarmac at Muroc Airfield, or Edwards Air Force Base, as it's now called. He's there for his first training flight with a new recruit to the astronaut program. He can see the kid now, trotting towards him from the barracks, looking thin as a reed in the heat ripples that rise from the blacktop. Yeager hears this kid's a good pilot, but a little wild. 4 days ago, he nearly crashed a top-secret plane called an X-15 after accidentally flying it farther than anyone ever had before. Colonel Yeager, it's an honor to meet you, sir. What's your name, kid? Neil Armstrong, sir. Armstrong. Heard you had a little trouble with the X-15 the other day. No trouble, sir. I was just making the machine talk to me. Yeager smiles. Okay, kid. Let's see what you got. Without Chuck Yeager, there would be no American space program. Not just because he trained future Apollo astronauts like Neil Armstrong. By proving that humans could travel faster than the speed of sound, Yeager demonstrated that they could also survive the tremendous speeds and g-forces needed to travel into space. Breaking the sound barrier was the small step before the small step for man and the giant leap for mankind. As Yeager himself put it, the real barrier wasn't in the sky, but in our knowledge and experience of supersonic flight. From Wondery, this is episode 2 of Breaking the Sound Barrier on American Innovations. A quick note about the recreations you've been hearing. In most cases, we can't know exactly what was said. Those scenes are dramatizations, but they're based on historical research. American Innovations is hosted by me, Stephen Johnson. For more information on my books and TV series about science and innovation, including my upcoming book and PBS series, Extra Life, A Short History of Living Longer, you can visit my website, StephenBerlinJohnson.com, or you can follow me on Twitter @StephenBJohnson. Sound design on this episode is by Jason Freeman. This episode was written by Katya Apakina, with editing by Liza Veal. Produced by Andy Herman and Natalie Shishaw. Executive produced by Jenny Lauer-Beckman, Marshall Louis, and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.
Can you imagine if someone you love disappeared without a trace? What lengths would you go to in order to find them? I'm Marissa Jones, host of The Vanished from Wondery. Each week, we dive into a missing person's case, speaking with those who are still searching for answers. This week, we're covering the disappearance of Ian Eccles in a special 3-part series. Ian disappeared on a hunting trip in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. Ian's friends and family began searching for him, thinking he must have been in some kind of accident or was stuck in the snow. They turned a corner and out of nowhere, Ian's car was coming right at them. Only it wasn't Ian driving. They had a brief altercation with the man inside of Ian's car that led to a massive manhunt to track down an armed fugitive who might just be a serial killer. Tune in to hear Ian's story. You don't want to miss this. Subscribe to The Vanished on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.